What if the world's largest plane didn't die in a fireball over Ukraine? What if the 640-ton Mriya was swallowed whole by a glacier, its 88-meter wingspan locked in blue ice, its cargo hold still sealed? One man tracked an anomaly in satellite scans. What he found frozen in that crevasse defies every explanation, and what he uncovers inside the hold will change everything. Meet Daniel Vance, a geospatial analyst hunting lost Soviet aircraft under polar ice. In 2024, a satellite heat anomaly revealed a shadow too large to exist. 6 engines, 88 meters of frozen fuselage. The Mriya was destroyed in 2022, or so we thought. It was here, sealed in ice, its cargo hold untouched. The truth about its final flight begins now. On February 27, 2022, the world watched the Mriya burn. Satellite imagery showed a smoking hangar at Hostomel, twisted wreckage where the largest aircraft ever built once stood. The official report was absolute. Direct hit, total loss, no survivors. The dream, they said, was dead. But 6 months later, Daniel Vance began finding things that didn't fit. Thermal scans from a decommissioned military satellite showed a persistent heat bloom beneath an Arctic glacier in Greenland. Not volcanic, not geothermal, but mechanical. Something was generating warmth deep inside the ice. The shape it traced was impossible to dismiss. A swept wing, a triple-engine cluster, an unmistakable tail. He cross-referenced declassified Russian flight logs from the invasion morning. A single Antonov-class transponder had blinked off the grid not in Ukraine, but 500 miles north of Svalbard, at 37,000 feet, before vanishing. The Ukrainian government had never disclosed a second Mriya. The nose of the partially built airframe was still in a Kyiv warehouse, but Daniel's models showed someone had completed it, and someone had flown it into the polar night. He assembled a 5-man expedition, mountaineers, cold weather engineers, a pilot named Emma Kovacs who'd spent years servicing Antonov cargo fleets. They entered the glacier through a meltwater crevasse, abseiling 80 meters into a cavern that shouldn't exist. Then their lights hit it. The fuselage, pale as bone, suspended in ice. 6 engines frozen solid. No fire damage, no bullet holes, just perfect, silent, monstrously intact. Daniel found the cockpit door warped but passable. On the captain's seat, a logbook, ink still legible. Emergency descent, cargo secure, we don't have much time. The date was February 27th. The cargo hold behind them was sealed from the inside and it was still warm. The warmth hit them first. In a -40-degree ice tomb, the cargo hold door radiated heat like a living heart. Daniel pressed his palm against the titanium seal. It vibrated faintly, a low hum as if something inside still had power. The logbook's entry stopped mid-sentence. We don't have much time. That was 918 days ago. Yet the hold remained sealed, its internal systems cycling. Something inside was being preserved. Emma ran a systems diagnostic from the cockpit's auxiliary panel. She'd spent 15 years on Antonov fleets, but no manual covered this. The instrument layout was a hybrid, half standard Mriya, half experimental Soviet hardware she'd only seen in declassified schematics. The transponder ID didn't match the destroyed Hostomel airframe. This machine had a different registration entirely, CCCP number 82073, a ghost tail number that existed nowhere in civil aviation records. But here's the thing, the power reserves were dying. The auxiliary thermal units that had kept the cargo hold at a stable 4 degrees since 2022 were down to 8% capacity. When they failed, everything inside would freeze solid. They had days, not weeks. Emma's plan was audacious. Revive the 6 engines, channel their thrust to jumpstart the onboard power grid, and get the cargo hold's heater back on full. Thawing one D18T turbofan in a glacier cavern was a nightmare. Stabilizing all 6 without cracking a frozen turbine blade. That required engineering precision under conditions that would kill an unprotected human in 12 minutes. They used heated collars, calibrated slow rotation sequences, and a portable generator the size of a shipping container lowered through the crevasse. The first engine coughed black smoke, then roared. Then the second, third, fourth. By engine 5, the ice walls were sweating. runoff threatening to flood the cockpit. They halted, reinforced the cavern with ice anchors, and pushed forward. By the time Engine 6 spooled to idle, Daniel noticed a detail in the logbook he'd overlooked. The captain's final entry beneath the words he'd read continued in smaller script farther down the page, as if written hours later. "They are not what we were told. Request override denied. We did what we had to do." The ink was different, deliberate. The crew hadn't just made an emergency landing. They'd hijacked their own aircraft, and whatever they'd stolen was still in the hold. Emma's hands shook as she turned the brittle page. The logbook's final entry wasn't in Cyrillic. It was in English, translated as if meant for whoever found it. "We are the flight crew of Mriya 2. Our orders were to transport Project Khalid to a black site in the northern Urals. We were told the cargo was biological archive material. It is not. Inside the hold are 23 human beings in cryogenic stasis. Soviet cosmonauts, geneticists, AI theorists, the last of a secret program the Kremlin erased. The moment we understood, we cut the transponder and turned north. We cannot let them be used. If you are reading this, time is running out. The sleep can't hold forever." Daniel read it twice. 23 people, frozen alive since the 90s. The warmth inside the hold wasn't just preservation, it was life support, cycling liquid oxygen through chambers never designed to run this long. The system had been jury-rigged in flight by the crew. They'd known they wouldn't survive the landing. The heat signature that had drawn Daniel here was the final pulse of a dying generator keeping a 2 decade to promise. But the tanks were almost empty. Cryogenic failure was inevitable within days. And now, by restarting the engines, they'd done something the crew never intended. The Mriya's electrical surge had triggered an automated distress beacon, a Soviet-era black box transponder buried in the avionics. It wasn't designed to call for rescue. It was designed to alert the original mission handlers. Somewhere, after 25 years, Moscow knew the plane was awake. Emma saw it on the frequency scanner first, a monotone code cycling on a military band, repeating the ghost tail number CCCP82073. Then the cipher stopped. A voice, barely accented, came through the static. "Mriya 2, your deviation is logged. Remain in place. Recovery team en route. Any attempt to access the hold will be met with extreme prejudice." This wasn't salvage. This was a retrieval operation. The program Daniel had never heard of, Project Khalid, wasn't buried Soviet history. It was active, and the people inside the hold were still valuable enough to kill for. He checked the coordinates embedded in the code. The recovery team was 7 hours out. Their transport was an IL-76, hardened for Arctic landing. The calculation was brutal. Without the engines, the hold would freeze completely, and everyone inside would die. With the engines running, they guided a hostile military team directly onto the glacier. Emma proposed the only option. They would run the engines to full taxi power, break the Mriya free from its ice cradle, and move the entire aircraft 3 kilometers west onto an ice shelf stable enough to hold a 600-ton plane. Then they'd open the hold and evacuate the chambers before the enemy arrived. It was insane. The landing gear was frozen solid. The runway didn't exist. But they had 6 engines, half a tank of fuel, and a debt to a dead crew. Emma began the thaw sequence on the landing struts while Daniel studied a hand-drawn map in the logbook. The crew had scouted a secondary site. They'd planned for this. They just never lived to do it. As the final strut cracked free and the Mriya groaned in its icy tomb, the hold's internal thermostat dropped 1 more degree. Time wasn't waiting. The recovery team was closing. And the 23 souls in the hold were the one secret nobody wanted thawed. The Mriya lurched forward like a mountain deciding to move. 6 engines at 40% thrust pulled a 150-meter ice slab with it, the frozen landing gear grinding ancient glacial layers into powder. Emma feathered the throttles from the cockpit while Daniel ran alongside the nose strut, watching for fractures. The secondary site was visible now. A flat shelf beyond a pressure ridge, its surface opaque and solid. They had 18 minutes before the IL-76 crossed into radar range. The struts held. The ice held. but the hold's thermostat had dropped another 0.3 degrees. The cryo chambers were entering their terminal phase. Emma killed the engines and sealed the cavern with the Mriya positioned precisely over the shelf. They opened the forward cargo door. The seal hissed, blue gas bleeding into the polar air. Inside, arranged in two concentric rings, stood 23 glass cylinders, each lit from below by a dying LED. Inside each cylinder was a human form suspended in milky gel, eyes closed, chest still. A single computer terminal at the center of the hold displayed 12 warnings in Cyrillic. One line translated: Patient Primakov, Yuri, cardiac rhythm detected. Consciousness threshold near. The crew hadn't just stolen 23 people. They stolen the director of the Soviet Artificial Intelligence Program, a cosmonaut who'd secretly spent 400 days in orbit before Gagarin's flight, and a geneticist whose work on cosmic radiation adaptation had been buried for decades. These weren't prisoners. They were the hidden architects of a vanished empire, and they were waking up. Daniel and Emma loaded the cylinders onto sledges, 6 at a time, racing against the IL-76's projected arrival. The recovery team was now 12 miles out, descending through cloud cover, but the glacier had its own timeline. The thawed cavern floor, weakened by engine heat, began to crack. The Mriya groaned, its nose gear sinking half a meter into newly liquid ice. Daniel grabbed the last cylinder, a woman listed only as Volkova, N, as the floor split open. The Mriya tilted, then slid sideways into the widening crevasse, its wings snapping against the ice walls. In 30 seconds, the world's largest aircraft vanished beneath the surface, swallowed whole. The cavern collapsed behind it. Daniel and Emma pulled the sledges onto the shelf as the IL-76 touched down on the ice runway they just abandoned. A dozen armed figures in white thermal gear emerged, but the shelf was already calving. A fissure between them widened into a chasm. The recovery team halted, radioed something unheard, and retreated to their aircraft. The glacier was claiming its prize, not the people but the machine itself, along with every scrap of evidence that Project Khalad had ever existed. Volkova's cylinder beeped. A single line appeared on its diagnostic panel: subject requesting communication. Daniel looked at Emma. They had saved 23 lives that the world had never known existed. But the first question belonged to the woman inside the glass, and her eyes were open. They never learned the full scope of Project Khalad. The survivors were hesitant, still thawing from decades of frozen silence. But Volkova whispered a single line as they crossed the ice shelf under a dim Arctic dawn. They told us our ideas were too dangerous, so they froze us until the world was ready. The question left unanswered. Ready for what? The Mriya, the dream, now rests 100 meters beneath the ice, broken but not erased. It held a secret that transcends war, borders, even time. The crew who sacrificed everything left a final message in that logbook. Dreams don't die. They just wait for someone to find them. Daniel and Emma may not have saved the plane, but they woke the passengers. And somewhere in the silence of the glacier, the Mriya's final flight isn't an ending. It's a countdown. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe and ring the bell. We're just getting started.